Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Peter and I are very excited to talk about something that many veterinary innovators are facing, but don't always see clearly. First, innovation in the veterinary space, as we all know, is accelerating really, really quickly. New platforms, new diagnostics, new services are entering quickly, and adoption is slow. We all know that. And one of the reasons is because as a whole, the industry is slow to adopt new things, especially in busy practices. But one of the things that happens is the breaking of the customer journey, right? So those are the things, that's what we're here to talk about today. And usually the breakdown in the customer journey happens much more earlier than we think. So again, welcome today. I am your host, Fotine Soteropoulos. I'm the founder and CEO of Thavma Consulting. I have 20 plus years of strategy and marketing in the vet space. I have worked in Fortune 5 companies, and really what I focus on now is helping startups and small veterinary innovation companies go to market with clarity. I'm joined here today by Peter. Peter, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joaquin. I'm really excited to talk to everybody here this morning. This morning here on the Pacific Coast, I guess. I graduated from veterinary school 35 years ago, and it's been fascinating to watch this profession on how it's evolved and how it's changed and how it continues to accelerate. I also think there's some really special things about this profession that is really important for us to preserve as we move forward. My career is the first 25 years of my practice. I owned and built a small single location practice, and then sold that practice about 11 years ago now. Went ahead and helped a private equity backed group launch here on the West Coast, and then decided to start and found my own group, which currently is 10 locations, almost at 11. It's 11 here in a few shortly. 10 locations here based out of Seattle, all general practice, small animal. And as I've continued to, as Cara has continued to grow, I really wanted to get into this area of helping industry, helping vendors who have some great solutions for practice and for this profession, help them make that step and have a good success with it. Known Fotine for a long time, and so it was natural as I started having a little bit of bandwidth to join with her and help. We're already working with some really special innovators in the industry, so excited to be here today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And I can say how the excitement I have of us working together and the same perspective and philosophy, especially around the customer journey, but we come at it from different sides of the coin or different sides of the experience. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the presentation. So why this conversation now? I said this at the beginning, innovation is accelerating at a really fast pace. And there are great new technologies, services coming to market, but the customer journey is breaking in hidden places. And that's really what we want to talk about today. We work, as Peter said, we're doing some work together with some clients who are bringing products to market or have products on market. And recently working with a company just on their customer journey to try to understand what's happening in order to make sure that we can shorten the time that the customer actually sees value in the solution, and really understand how we can support them in terms of adoption. And the thought was, and this is a good thought, that, onboarding for a product like this takes about, 90 days, and you're not onboarding the entire time, but you're supporting that journey as they're implementing this in practice. And when we dug into their journey, what we realized is actually was happening at day 14. And those are the things we really need to understand to make sure that we're stopping churn before it happens, that we're truly understanding what happens from the moment they invite the solution into the practice and start to implement it through really having it become part of their system in practice. And Peter, I'd love your perspective here.
Yeah, I think every situation is different. I think sometimes this churn is actually happening pre-onboarding because the team was not set up for success. And so I think it's this process if we think through initial interest, and I think we have this here, the right here, but with, the interest, the developing of the trust, and then the sales, pitch for a better word, and how is that all aligned with the onboarding aspect, and then who all is involved. I think that's the who is a major break that often happens. And that if we look at this chart right here and we think about, the marketing, who are you marketing to? Often it's the person who's signing the check, right? And then the sales is often to who's signing the check, right? And then, but we kind of forget who's actually using the product. And so there can be some breaks in this cycle that happen even before onboarding. And we can give, I think later on here this morning, we'll give some other specific examples of where this happened. But I see this happen frequently where there's just not alignment with, the sales team on the onboarding team, and then who's all involved through all this processes. And often the group that's actually using the product, the team, it feels like this is the tablet from above that is thrown upon them, and they don't understand the why. And so I think it's really important to think of this all as a continuum. They're not separate buckets, but often in today's world, they are considered separate buckets, and that's a lot of break.
Yeah. And we really use the marketing hourglass to operationalize the customer journey. So we're understanding from the first moment, as Peter said, when they start to learn about a product, how do they do it? What questions may they be asking? And how do you begin to build trust with them in every part of the journey? And the journey really doesn't begin with promotion. It's not about more marketing or shoving people down through their journey, but it's really about understanding what they need, building trust at every part of the journey, and also building confidence. So they feel really great about the decision they're making and they feel supported as they're implementing it in practice. One thing that I didn't say at the beginning is we, of course, will save time for questions at the end, but we would love for you to jump in at any time if you have questions or thoughts. Just go ahead and unmute yourself, and we're happy to hear from you. So, where does the customer journey actually break? And I think that as we're working with clients, there are a lot of assumptions made based on some things that they may or may not know about how a product or a service is being implemented in practice. A lot of times, you're thinking that the journey is breaking at the know or awareness stage. So people feel like there needs to be more promotion and more marketing that needs to happen, more channels engaged around this point. But really, what we see is it actually breaks once they start to try and buy and really experience the product inside their practice. And as the team comes together, implement it as a team. And as Peter said, what we're finding is sometimes you're talking to the decision maker and they're on board because they have a set of goals. But then when we start talking to the people who are actually using the product or the service, it sounds like I was just told that I need to do this. I was told that I need to implement it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's working for me. And it really starts to break the customer journey. So again, as you're going through this, you need to make sure that you're talking to all the decision makers. But more than that, you really need to be building trust and supporting them. So what does onboarding truly look like? What happens in the first 10 days? What happens in the first 30 days and 60 days? That really is a critical time. And then 90 days and beyond is really where you're continuing to build trust and make sure that they have the things that they need, but you're also continuously adding value. So the reality is veterinary teams are always asking themselves, is this going to slow my team down? Will this integrate with how we already work, or will it be hugely disruptive? And is it worth changing what we do today? It might be just easier if we stay doing what we do. And Peter, I'd really like your perspective on this.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of layers we could dive into on this, but I think what's really interesting to me, and as I've seen through my career go, where when I was initially as an owner of Chuckanut Valley Vet Clinic, my first practice, there was 3 doctors and we would do change management, but I was shoulder to shoulder with the team. And so we could react to, I could encourage, I could understand better because I was boots on the ground. I was working as at one of our first big switches, we went completely paperless with cornerstone. And going through that process, I was able to be side by side with the team. As we've gotten bigger with multi-location doctors, that's just isn't possible. And so all of a sudden, it's really important to ask these questions. How is this going to work with the current workflow? And I'm not side by side. So I can't be encouraging every one of these situations to do this. So it is really important to pull in some of the people, the stakeholders that are actually using the product day to day and really understand how is this? Because I'll guarantee you this will become the shiny new object that's sitting on the counter that collects dust. If the team doesn't understand the why are we doing this? And also if we as a management group, you as a potential innovator in this don't understand how this integrates with already a team that feels overworked, overwhelmed, doesn't feel like we have an extra minute to do this. And especially if they don't understand the end, because change usually does take longer. To do something different and new takes longer than your today's. And it helps a lot if we could see, the light at the end of that tunnel, but really acknowledging this from the very beginning. This will slow you down for the next 60 days. Here's how we're going to help you. Here's what it's going to do for you in this time frame. We are side by side with you, whether that's in person or remotely, but really understanding this is not an easy thing. We have a minimum wage assistant that's out there that is stressed already, and we're asking them to do this. And oftentimes, especially like I said, the multi-location, this becomes a real separate from the decision maker to the actual person using the product.
Thank you. And we have someone who wants to ask a question. Suzanne, I've unmuted you. Can you hear me? We can.
Okay. Yeah, I just was I'm backtracking a little bit here because I can't type as fast as you guys are going. But one of the things that we often encounter is the need for team buy-in and not just one person buy-in. And the one person buy-in is often that decision maker, the one who signs the check or who completes the application to work with our company. But sometimes it's really hard to accomplish that. It's sort of up to the person adopting our service to disseminate the information to the team. But what are ways that we could make that easier? What are ways that we could encourage it? What we've definitely found is if there's one person that has signed up for this, they may not really communicate this well to the rest of the team. The rest of the team isn't aware and or the rest of the team doesn't have a philosophical buy-in like with our particular product. They might say, "Well, I don't think that this is a good idea." Well, clearly someone else in the clinic thought it was, and that's why they adopted it. So, do you guys have any experience with how to help teams accomplish that with clinics?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take that first one, Tina. I'll let you add in. I 100% hear you, and I think this is it's a really critical thing for every group to figure out. How I've approached this, and I'm actually working with somebody right now on this specific subject. Is you need to decide who are the critical people that you've seen in your success that need to be involved. Like you need to have your receptionist, you need to have your practice manager, you need to have your associate vets. I don't know what product you have exactly, Suzanne. So but you have the key people that you have determined based on when you looked at a successful onboarding as well as, implementation, et cetera, through that. What does that model look like? And then really be upfront with a group that comes in that says, "Hey, I want my product." And you're like, "Well, here's how the onboarding playbook looks exactly. And these are critical steps. And I would not, if you're not willing to engage these people in this product or in this solution, it may be not the right solution for you." I think you need to be very transparent through that. Like the specific example I had on recently was this group was putting in a program for a corporate group, and it was a mandate from above from, the C-suite that was putting that down, and they refused to let the group, the new product, the new company even talk to the receptionists or the managers on the location at all. And
Mhm.
it was a complete failure. And so my advice to her is like, you'd been better off probably not even sign up for this. If they're not willing to commit to this like minimal aspect of things, it may not be the right solution for that group, because I can guarantee you, as I am sitting with there's a couple layers between myself and the receptionist in our group. It is really critical that I engage with them on this level through anything we bring in. So I'll let Fotine add to that, but it's a really critical aspect. And I think it needs to be individualized for your solution. Like, who are those critical stakeholders? But I could list off probably 20 examples in my career where that exact thing has happened. And ultimately, it was an unsuccessful launch of a product into our hospitals.
Yep. Yeah. And I agree with that. I echo what Peter said. And often, well, I have seen as successful as you make it part of the onboarding process and the kickoff, right? So, and you set expectations up front, and then, you know, I don't want to say force is not the right word, but you start to work through that process to say, okay, who should be in the kickoff? Who's going to be talking, to pet parents about the solution specifically for your product? Suzanne, what are the things that they need? And here's the process we put in place to support that, so you can implement it in your practice and your staff can be really comfortable talking about this particular solution or using this particular solution. And those are the things we've seen work best in the past.
The other thing I
Are
would
you
add to
still?
that is there's a brand story that is different for all elements of the practice. So the brand story for a product for me might be around the ROI, might be around the booking rate. I'm thinking of a specific example, but the brand story for like my receptionist for a product that we've just recently highly successfully launched is, I'm not stressed at the end of the day. And I'm actually able to pick up new hobbies after work because I'm not exhausted all the time. And so those are very different elements for the same product. Not that one's more important than the other, but I think understanding, what does your solution do for everybody who touches it, and really understand, be able to talk that message to them so they do understand the why. And I know it's frustrating because a lot of the managers or the owners or the executives, a lot of these groups don't do a very good job communicating to them. And it is a challenge. It's a problem in the industry, partly because a lot of the leaders of a lot of organizations actually haven't worked as a receptionist or haven't worked in the exam room. And so there is a disconnect onto there. So I know how frustrating that can be, because you do need some support from the local leadership or the leadership of the organization through that.
So we're going to break that down a little bit more. So what does the breaking point look like? And really the first point is the understanding. So because things are being pushed down through the organization or, through the practice, veterinary teams don't often understand what problem is being solved. Maybe they like the workflow or they like the solution they have in place now. When should they use the solution and why it matters to their workflow? So as you think about this and you think about the decision makers, you're very focused on why this matters to them. Then you need to make sure that that's translating down to each of the roles that are going to be impacted in the practice. Breaking point number 2 is usually evaluation. This one, I think is interesting, especially through some of my work I do with clients. I'm doing client interviews, but I'm also jumping in at different points of the customer journey. So, for example, I'm jumping on sales calls. And I've been on sales calls where it's the decision maker, but the person who's actually going to be responsible for the implementation is not on that call. And on the other hand, I've been on calls where both the decision maker and the person who's really going to be owning this and becoming the practice champion is in the evaluation. And what they want to understand is this working in practices like ours? Who are the other practices that are using your solution? What does the implementation actually look like? When you say it's easy, what does that mean? They want to pull that apart. And then, as I said earlier, who on the team actually owns this? Not only who's going to be the champion, but who's going to be using it. And in this point, it's, really important to have proof assets that matter, right? Practices that are using it, have case studies, see how it works in practice so they can understand how it might work in their practice. Breaking point number 3 is at the adoption. Even after purchase, if onboarding is really unclear and they don't have the support that they need, if expectations are misaligned, maybe they're thinking one thing and, you're thinking another, and then there's a whole bunch of uncertainty. So making sure you have a really clear onboarding journey and you're designing it This is where the design really, really matters. So you're understanding from the first moment that they're using your solution, what needs to happen up to that moment, what that moment feels like. Is it easy? Is it hard? Is there a lot of friction in that place? And then does it impact adoption as the days go on in having it in practice? The pattern we often see is that breakdown is really an awareness. It's really in the confidence in the product, and all of those things that we've just talked about in terms of the breaking points build into that, and start to build the trust and the confidence across the journey. So adoption requires confidence. They need clarity. What needs to happen? Who needs to be there? Is there anything that the practice needs to prepare beforehand to help implement this solution in practice? We talked about proof and then guidance. Without these, even the strongest products, where when you see it or hear about it or go to the website, you think this is a no brainer, implementing those products in practice can often stall if these things place. So, Peter, you've touched a little bit about this, but can you pull on the thread a little bit and talk about when a new product or service enters a clinic, what determines whether the team actually adopts it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of critical elements to have successful adoption. One of the most critical, and we've spoken about this, but I really want to emphasize this again, is making sure that everybody within that's touching the product or the service understands why they're doing it. And we also acknowledge how this is changing their daily workflow right now. An example of having on this that was an unsuccessful launch was a product that on the sales and the demo and even through the onboarding is like, wow, this looks great. This is slick. This is easy. It works well with our practice management system. And then in reality, it was really delaying the service. And this was a pet wellness program software. And we really took a long time for them to onboard. It was kind of confusing. They had to leave our PIMS and go to here. And as I spent some time in the clinic and observing, we had posters up in the lobby that said, don't forget to ask about our wellness program. And I found that the team was just praying that the client didn't ask about the wellness program. And you could see their shoulders drop when the client said, hey, what about this wellness program? Because how it was affecting their workflow. It could have been the best product in the world. It could have been great for the pets. It could have been great for the clients, but ultimately it wasn't viewed as a good thing by the team. It was viewed of, and I asked them about it and they were like, well, I'm all of a sudden getting home at 6:30 instead of 6 or 7 instead of 6 or whatever. It was affecting that. And so them really we understanding what is this, how are these challenges, how is this going to be met for that first 30 days, that first 60 days, that first 90 days, what can we as a management team as well as a innovator, as a product owner, what can we do to help get through that? How can we make that easier if it takes some time to adopt? Us really understanding the exact workflow. Integration in this industry is a challenge, and how is this integrating? How is this affecting that workflow? And really seeing it in action when somebody's also trying to hold a pet, as well as a drop a vaccine, as well as clean some ears, as well as understand a doctor talking, right? There's a lot going on all at the same time. And do we really understand how that fits into that? Because if it's creating more work, if it's not relatively easy and the team doesn't see the why and or the light at the end of the tunnel, it's not going to work. And so I think this has to start very early stages at the sales time.
What Peter was getting at is leadership discipline, making sure that you're strengthening the journey before scaling exposure. So, clarifying understanding, strengthening proof, supporting adoption. The understanding, I think, is a huge piece. How does it affect each of the stakeholders? And how is it going to affect the rhythm of the practice and the things they do day to day. One of the things that you can think about as you're building your own journeys is the breakpoint check. Trying to identify, where does understanding break? Where does evaluation stall? And where does adoption slow? Obviously, you think about this ideal, being able to talk to your customers anytime reaching out to them and saying, "Hey, I want to hear about how things are going," can sometimes be difficult. So what you should be doing is taking any opportunity where you are in front of those customers to really listen and try to understand. So maybe through the onboarding, you experience some things and you think, "Oh, this is not a big deal. I can just go ahead and email them and it'll be fine." But you want to make sure that you're building that into the process so it's happening automatically and you're not waiting for those moments of break. For evaluation, where does it stall? Maybe you've had some really great conversations with someone in practice and you think we're going to implement it, and then when it really comes to those people who are going to be implemented in practice, it stalls. And it doesn't move. And I'm sure all of you have experienced having great conversations at meetings or at trade shows and getting buy-in ultimately from the person who signs the check, and then you feel like they've ghosted you after the fact because it's not translating well to the team. And then in terms of adoption, maybe you've gotten them through registration or onboarding depending on what your journey looks like, and maybe they're only using your product or service or once and then they don't use it again, or maybe they sign up and they don't use it at all. You need to dig in to figure out what's actually happening so you can address that and make sure it's not happening anymore, to not only stop churn but also to be able to grow your customer base and making sure that the experience can support that and your team internally can support that. One of the things that we do when we start talking to um, the potential clients is something we call a friction audit that helps teams really just to quickly understand, where we do some friction mapping, some traction breakpoint analysis, and then we provide teams with a debrief so they can start to understand some of those points in the journey. If any of what we're saying resonates with you, we're not already working together, this is one way that we could, and we'd love to be able to do that for you. So Peter, I think that this is a really important perspective. What do veterinary teams wish that innovators better understood as they were bringing products to market?
I think the most critical thing is really understanding everything that's going on within the practice. So let's say I'm bringing in an AI scribe technology. How is that fitting into everything that's happening in the real world? And oftentimes these product or solutions look amazing and great when you're on a laptop and you're doing a quiet room. And as an example of one I was testing, and I was doing it in my office, and oh, it was perfect. It picked up everything. And then I brought it into the exam room, and all of a sudden the barking dog and the technician that opens the door and says, "Dr. Brown, there's a call," and all of this. It was so confused through everything. And so really how I think often innovation thinks of this as like their own little silo, this product that looks amazing on its own, but how does it fit into that better picture? And how the importance of how this affects all of the team. Because, as a veterinarian, we're so dependent on our team that's around us. And so, how is this helping the receptionists? How is this helping our technicians, our assistants? How is this helping our managers? And really thinking about how this fits into everything else that's going on, and for these pets as well as for the people that are loving them and taking care of them. And so I think it's really a critical thing to think through of how is this fitting into the overall current picture and the current flow, and really thinking if it's going to disrupt that, is it worth that disruption, and how do we actually walk through everybody through that?
Yeah, and I think some of the work that I do with my clients is, Peter said, there may be a product that's awesome and it seems like a no-brainer, and maybe they'll say, it was built by veterinarians. And so my first question is, well, help me understand that. So do you have a veterinarian on staff? Do you have advisors? Do you have a clinical advisory board? Are you talking to your customers on an ongoing basis? And I've heard things like, well, my sister-in-law is a technician, so she's been guiding us. And that's really great for early insights or maybe some direction, but you really need to get in front of all the stakeholders. You really need to be talking to them and truly understand what's happening in practice and how it's going to influence your product, how you go to market, and then ultimately, how you onboard the customer. One of the things that we've put out recently is a 2026 marketing considerations guide. As we're going through this, you may be shaking your head and feeling like you've experienced this, but maybe you don't know where to start. This was something that we put out, and you can find on the website under our resource center, and walks through the customer journey and how it might be more fragile than you actually think, and gives you some tools and resources to be able to diagnose on your own. I'm actually going to stop sharing, and I want to open it for any last minute, any questions that anyone might have. Suzanne, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Based on something that I heard from a practice manager slash owner that I talked to last week. And I thought it was really important. He talked to me about his team having platform fatigue or app fatigue. This is not something I'd ever thought of before in relation to our own company. But he said, think about it. He said, my teams are switching between multiple apps and platforms all day long. Like they might be doing something in Pet Desk or Auto. They might be dealing with an AI scribe. They might be dealing with Weave or Talkatoo or VetCove for, inventory ordering. And he said they're constantly switching tasks. But then another thing he brought up to me and that I've noticed in my own clinics is that when you're there, like client service reps usually have their computers open to their PIMs because that's what they're dealing with all day. And then that actually maybe obscures some of those other apps and platforms that they might be using or might not think of. I just thought it was a really relevant thing that he brought up in terms of customer journey and adoption that I had never really thought about before. That's like a real thing. And that, like you said, innovation is continuing at a rapid pace. Innovators are entering spaces that are already crowded. And and then clinics feel like they need to have all these ancillary platforms to help them do their job, but some of them are going to just get forgotten about or not used. Is that something that you guys have heard before or certainly encountered, like Dr. Brown in a clinical setting, I would think?
Yeah, 100%, Suzanne. I think that's where really understanding everything that's going on, because let's take one example you just mentioned, like the pet desk. Like it's a great solution. It's awesome. It has a lot of neat things about it. But if you look at, okay, if I only had my PIMS and pet desk, fine. But next thing you know, I have four other tabs open and I'm going back and forth. Communication is not always fractional or smooth through that process. Another product we were looking at, there was a lot of manual entry that was having to take place, right? And think about how that potentially could break a solution to, or at least as practices get bigger, all of a sudden it's like, you mean I have to hire somebody to do just manual entry, right? What am I really solving? So
Right.
I do think it is a problem in the industry. The other thing that's happening, and not that it's good or bad, but the fast innovation that is happening in most areas is actually being done by very narrow products, meaning that they're only really solving for one thing. And that's where innovation's happening really fast, but they're not necessarily integrated with everything. And then the products that are actually integrated that some of the PIMs are developing aren't accelerating as quickly, right? Just because they're a bigger company. They have a lot of things happening. And so we're getting this gap of quality of innovation, and the better in many cases is the ones that are solely focused on that one solution, but they're also the ones that are creating fatigue. And so it is an interesting challenge. I mean, I'm always like, I want one button. I remember actually talking to somebody like 10 years ago. I want one button that does everything. And obviously that's probably not reality, but how do we've actually gotten more and more. And without an open APIs through most of these companies, we're really struggling with some of that integration or solution that is one focus. Because as an owner or a veterinarian, I don't really care what I want that happening in the background. I don't want that
Right.
happening for me. So it's a great question. I don't have the answer to that because I think it's getting worse. I think
Yeah.
it's really important that everybody understands it, though.
Yeah, and I think it's worth it for any founder or members of your team if you know a vet well enough to say, "Hey, can I come into your clinic and hang out and shadow somebody or even just sit in the waiting room?" Then you get an idea of the reality of clinic life and the pace and the number of competing priorities. And instead of, like you mentioned earlier, thinking of your product in a silo, like
Yeah.
I often think to myself that teams are not spending their entire day thinking about what my product does for them. They have a million other things going on. And I think it was really helpful to me to just go and sit there and observe. And I have a friend that owns a clinic. So she actually let me spend several days there over a period of months where I would shadow different doctors. And it helped me kind of see where the pain points were and understand better what they're going through. Because we often think about we're solving a problem. And yeah, it might definitely be a problem for them, but how is it going to fit in to their workflow and their daily demands? And it's really challenging, I think.
That's also happening within groups, just for knowledge onto that too. So even not looking outside, but often the executives are making decisions for the team, but then they're not spending a lot of time actually with the team. So they don't understand the implications of those decisions that they make. There's a break that's happening from, especially as some of the groups get a little bit bigger, there's often a break that's for that exact same reason within the same organization that's happening, just because not spending enough time observing how decisions are affecting that individual on that moment.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's really good practice, Suzanne, to be able to be in practice. You learn so much. I know that I have done that and want to continue to do that when I can just go in and hang out for the day. Tony, I see that you have your hand raised and you're unmuted.
One of the biggest problems that we find is you have a lot of these smaller, innovative companies out there that are bringing a lot of value to vet med, but they can't get incorporated into the PIMS because the big guys, even if the small company can write the APIs and integrate with the PIMS, they will not allow you to integrate with their PIMS, either because they want X number of dollars or they want X number of clinics you already serve, and or they have agreements with other vendors that might compete with you and they will not allow you to integrate. So that is a big problem in the vet med.
100% agree with you, Tony. It is a major problem. And I mean, there's examples where I have chosen what I viewed as an inferior product, but I knew it integrated. And so that is part of our decision making when we're looking at comparing products and looking at pros and cons. If it's another non integrated solution, it better blow, it must be so much better than the one that's integrated. And that's unfortunate. I mean, I think about many examples. I don't know the full solution to that. And there's a lot smarter people than me out there that hopefully can help work through this over time. It is a challenge in the industry and it is ultimately affecting advancement for us.
Correct.
Yeah. And I just wonder if there are other ways that you can think about it. I know, Tony, we've talked about that. Is it a CSV file that they can upload the data? And that's still an extra point. But there are a lot of things happening with AI agents and things like that that could be a solution that could help. I don't know that for sure, but thinking creatively outside of the box, I think in those moments with everything that's happening, just with technology moving fast in general, may address some of that.
I think, Tony, one point I would say on that is it's really important that you acknowledge it up front, because I think that's where I've gotten deep down the pathway with some products where being told over and over, oh, it's fully integrated. And, put quotation marks, what does integration really mean? And so I think it's very important to be transparent through that, but that also address it from the very upfront.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're very transparent, but it's a matter of we can do anything, CSV file, APIs, anything, but if we're not allowed to, we
Yeah.
can't. And it's a shame because these practices are missing out on quality
Yep.
small businesses that can give them a lot of good services.
100% agree.
Seriously, there are companies that say they integrate and you have to ask, what does that mean? What do they mean?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, we really appreciate, I want to be mindful of time. We really appreciate everyone joining us today. And we hope that you found this useful. Also, Peter and I are here to help. We talk to people every day um, and just swap ideas because at the end of the day, what we really care about is advancing the industry. So
Yeah.
if we can
And
help
think
it,
of us as you're not alone, right? We're here to help. And I think it's really exciting to think about where there's challenges. It's not easy, but we're kind of here to help. But I think the perspective that Foteam brings and the symbiotic aspect of us together, I think it's really fun as we work through different companies and we're approaching it from different ways, but with a great alignment through of how do we actually help you move forward. So yeah, really excited for this chapter of my career.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great day.